Who's the weirdest character in Frieren Beyond Journey's End? Is it the alcoholic priest, the overly vain hero, or the 1,000-year-old elf that still somehow falls prey to every mimic she runs across? With a vast ensemble cast, you'd think it'd be one of the more peculiar characters. But what if I told you it's actually the character that somehow is the most normal of them all? The relatively old man who made a practical decision years ago to live a normal life. Because what makes this character so weird isn't just who he is, but more specifically how he fits into the story. Welcome to a running series called Exploring Frieren. My name is Pei, and today we're talking about a show that consistently surprised me but never shocked me, until it did. Frieren is a story built around outstanding characters, and something they do a lot is embrace trope before subverting it. This constantly leads to surprising but not very shocking moments because they're so well set up. Throughout watching this show, it felt like I was always able to predict something a little bit before it happened, but these decisions were still consistently pleasantly surprising, always seeming to land in a place that was both unique, enjoyable, and more than anything very satisfying. So how do you create a character that in many ways is very bland and normal, but still somehow shocks the audience? You change the context in which he's introduced. Today's video is brought to you by me. I'm surprised at how many people are supporting this channel on Patreon. It's pretty cool. Someday soon, I'll replace this with actual ads that'll be way more profitable, but in the meantime, if you want to support the series or the channel and have disposable income, consider going to my Patreon. There's a link in the description below. Something that makes Frieren such an interesting show to talk about is all the little stories that each episode explores. In some ways they function episodically, having fully explored stories from beginning to end in single episodes, sometimes half an episode. But in other ways they consistently contribute to character arcs and the overarching story. One of my favorite little stories was the introduction of a character, Sein. The entire episode where he first shows up is actually really fantastic. So much so that it's hard to really appreciate until you watch it a second time. Not only is it great, and I'll give a synopsis in a second, but it also works really well with the way the show has been set up beforehand. You see, Frieren is this weird mix of predictability and subversion. For example, they embrace archetype in a lot of ways, but then subvert the way that archetype is explored. A good example of this is the way they treat characters that only play a small part in the whole story. Take Kraft the Monk, for example, a character that's only on screen for about 10 minutes but contributes so much to the overarching plot and is incredibly fleshed out. Setting and world building is expanded on so much when characters feel like they exist off-frame, but it also helps a lot with that predictability that comes with classical storytelling structure. With how common these characters are, it makes it a lot harder to predict who's going to be a more established character versus one that's just passing. And the whole point of this video is specifically to highlight how they play around that dynamic with Sein as a character. But before we get there, he's also just a fantastic addition to the story. Part of what makes him such a strong character is the way he contributes to these overarching themes about the human condition that run throughout the entire series. Take, for example, this really common experience people face when aging, where people feel like it's too late, the opportunity has passed for them to pursue the things that they once dreamt of. The regret of not pursuing a passion is something that a lot of people can relate to, especially those who've lived a little bit longer. As life goes on, doors start to close, opportunities diminish. But one of the core lessons I've learned from my elders and then through practice is that we assume that there are many things that it's too late to pursue, when in reality that's not always the case. I, as a 26-year-old, will never be a professional basketball player, and every year after 18 that became more and more true. But people so often look at things that are totally within their means and say, I'm too old. Sein's story arc challenges that common pitfall. I almost want to make an entire video about it, so maybe I will, but I want to highlight the fact that Sein's arc and relationship with the characters around him is so much more than just dancing around this interesting dynamic. So what about Sein's character is so weird? Let's start first by synopsizing his introduction. Before we even know who the character is, or the context in which him and Frieren are around one another, Sein starts with exposition, that he once dreamt of being an adventurer, but now he looks at it as a dumb, childish dream. And before Frieren has a chance to respond, we cut to the opening title sequence. Then we get more exposition, Sein sharing his childhood. Exposition doesn't come cheap, so normally when characters are introduced with so much of a backstory, it implies that they're going to be here for a while. But then it's revealed that he's stuck in a bottomless swamp asking for Frieren's help. It's a joke for me that landed really well. All of that exposition maybe was just setup for this punchline. After some more fun dialogue and Frieren actually getting him out, we find out that our party of 3 heroes isn't actually going to stop in this village. In his farewell, Sein gives them a warning that there are many venomous creatures in the area and that they should be careful. So far, in just a couple minutes, Sein has been introduced with exposition, which implies he's going to be a character that sticks around. They then subvert that expectation and go separate ways. Or, putting on my tinfoil hat, that's just what they want you to think. It's all a ruse. Because literally, immediately after, they cut to a scene where Stark is bitten by a venomous snake, and the party has to backtrack to that previous village. This is what I was talking about earlier with setup that leads to predictability. But then again, it's done so well I don't really mind. Back at the village, Stark is presented to a respected priest who once studied under Hyder. This happens to be Sein's older brother, and he tells Frieren that this venom is actually incredibly difficult to cure, almost uncurable. But maybe his brother could do something about it. Then Sein shows up and cures it, and Frieren deems he's a genius. Okay, at this point I thought I knew where the story was going. They were going to spend the rest of the episode convincing Sein to join them. Frieren was going to re-establish a party of 4 heroes with clear roles, because obviously they need a priest, and they'd all go on an adventure together. This predictable outcome would also be paired with some interesting subversion, depth I wouldn't quite expect, something that's surprising but not shocking. Now, Sein is a fantastic character for reasons I can't fully explain in this video, because there's too many things he does that are really interesting, and I want to stay focused on what this video is specifically about, which is not just Sein's contribution to the story, but specifically his place in it, because for 4 episodes, everything goes exactly like I would expect. Sein fits perfectly into the group, an archetypal character that's still subversive. He's fun, well-written, and more than anything works with the other characters in a really interesting way. But an important thing to understand about this character is that he had a best friend growing up who desperately wanted to be an adventurer, a kid who called himself the Guerrilla Warrior. And then one day, about 10 years ago, Sein's best friend left to adventure and invited Sein to come with him. But Sein felt a deep responsibility to both the village and his brother. Unable to leave, 10 years passed, and he regretted the decision. As time passed, Sein realized just how much he regretted that decision, a sunk cost fallacy preventing him from ever taking a leap of faith. Because Frieren sees Sein as a genius, she has an initial aversion to adding him to the party or pushing for him to join them. But when Sein's brother advocates for him, she realizes he's in the same position that she was once in, before she was helped by someone very important to her. Frieren was stuck in comfort and habit, but one day Himmel the hero showed up and pushed her in the right direction, asked for her to join them in their quest to beat the Demon King, something she really needed. Direction, something that would prevent stagnation and help her step outside of her comfort zone. Frieren sees her experience in Sein's and gives him the same perspective that she once got, that it's not a matter of past decisions or regrets, just one of the present. What decision do you want to make now? Sein wants to find his childhood friend, the Guerrilla Warrior, so he joins them, and for 4 episodes it's great, before the story presents a precarious situation. They find a lead. The Guerrilla Warrior had headed the opposite direction that Frieren's party needs to go. Sein as a character fits so perfectly in the party. The structure of Frieren's previous party being 4 and the new one being 4 indicates that this is likely what will stick. Frieren's plot up until this point has been heavily influenced by structured storytelling, so everything in my bones made me believe that this party would stick together, that one of the 2 groups being pulled in opposite directions would compromise, we'd get a side quest, or Sein would decide to go with the party and maybe stumble upon his friend. But that's not the initial decision he makes. He's gonna leave, go on his own, and search for his friend. But then, as they're about to go on their own ways, a snowstorm stops them, forcing them to stay in this small town for another couple months. Another back and forth, will he stay, will he go? But as the snow cleared, I was surprised to find that Sein didn't change his mind. And up until the second he literally walked away, I didn't believe he'd go. But then he did. And 17 episodes into Frieren, I found myself for the first time completely shocked. He fit into the story in such a weird way. There's so many characters with defining attributes or unique personalities. But because of the way they set this up, Sein is the one that sticks out to me the most. I don't know how well I properly explained this entire dynamic, but it's so good. Frieren is kind of this story built off of trope. Let's call that A. And then eventually it subverts that trope, offering depth you wouldn't expect. That's B. When Sein left, it was another great example of just how strong Frieren's writing is. It was another significant step towards a deeper story. C. Because to introduce a character so well and set up everything to go one direction and go the opposite, it's just not at all what I expected from Frieren. I was happy with all the other things the story was doing. I didn't need something like this to be so surprising. But this decision to create characters that exist off frame, stories that aren't always intertwined with our heroes, it adds so much to everything this story offers. Sein is such a lovable character with unique little quirks, like somehow being a more deprived priest than Hyder, or his obsession with adventuring with an older woman, which we learn is way more about a person's vibe than their actual age. Sein added so much to the story, then before we knew it, he went on his own. It was so shocking, but it felt right. A kind of bittersweet in losing a character that you grew to really care for, but also a beautiful dynamic where he got the push he needed to go on the adventure he always dreamt of. A normal character that engaged in a structured story in a completely shocking way. I don't know if this is the last time we'll see Sein, but I do deeply respect the decision to have him leave. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, consider going and checking out the one from last week. I'm really proud of it, and it kind of underperformed because I wasn't really sure how to package it. Thanks, I'll see you next week.